All right. Well, I'll start and we can just add people as they come in. Welcome to our January 21st Lunch and Learn. Today's topic is all about regulations. Um, the intention today is really just to provide a very high level refresher on some of our kind of most high risk regulations or areas where we see a lot of non-compliances and just challenges in the sector. Um, Please feel free to use the chat throughout the workshop today. Feel free to put your hand up if you want to ask a specific question. I am not here today as a licensing officer or any form of representation from the government of Alberta or the ministry. Just here today as another operator, a fellow operator, to really kind of go through some experiences, lived, shared experiences on the floor, dealing with regulations, dealing with licensing challenges, and to provide some support and answer any questions that you have in that capacity. So, really appreciate everyone's time on a January lunch hour and hope to keep this short. We like to try and keep them about half an hour, 45 minutes, and then open it up for questions. Like all of our lunch and learns, we're here today because of the generosity and support of ChildFriendly. Wayne usually is here as a representative for ChildFriendly to answer any questions you might have, to talk about the software and the management tools that it can provide you. I will do my best. We do have other folks on the call today from ChildFriendly, but if there's anything that we can't answer today, I'm absolutely happy to pass it over and make sure that you get those questions answered following up. So this is what we're going to hope to tackle today. Kind of some survival tips for childcare operators. We're going to talk a little bit about understanding the policy around our field, talk about what is different between regulations versus the Child Care Act. We are also going to discuss very high level kind of what the role of licensing officers is versus what the role of maybe a license holder or an educator is. Some of the common areas of non-compliance, and then some quick tips for compliance across the board, and then open it up to questions. So again, feel free to ask any questions you might have, to talk through scenarios. We're absolutely here today with the intention to provide resources and support to all of you so that you leave feeling that you can do your job better, that you have a better understanding of the regulations that are required. So if you've attended any of our webinars here or any workshops that I've hosted, you likely know that I have a very strong feeling that we need to understand the policy behind anything in our sector in order to really be able to pivot, to have a full understanding of where things are going in childcare and where we're at. This again is just a very high level idea for today, but why does it understand what policy, why does it matter to you, I guess, to understand what policy is behind childcare funding? And the reason I'm covering this today with regulations is that policy is absolutely tied to regulations, but your regulatory compliance can impact your ability to participate in programs, maybe like the affordability grant funding and those kind of things. So we also have seen a shift in policy in the last year that comes with different enforcement levels in regulations, with administrative penalties and different things along those lines. So I wanted to have this in here based on that. Policy really, as business owners, if you're here today as an operator, policy really impacts your business sustainability, your funding eligibility and requirements, and the risks around non-compliances. If you're a license holder, there's absolutely large risks around being in this field and having any non-compliance. Understanding policy really can help you to navigate investment and risk when funding is tied to licensing compliance, like our administrative penalties. It's important to understand, what the regulations are, what the requirements are, can help with assessing business decisions through policy lensing, and provide practical tips for reducing risk. So we'll talk a little bit about documentation, policy review, clear communication, and some practical kind of guidance around that. So I always, will often really not touch on what the Child Care Act covers, but sometimes people are confused about what the difference is between the two and what the purpose of them really is. So I like to kind of point out that the childcare regulations are really the how. So there are specific operational requirements of you as a license holder or you as an educator. There are detailed rules that you have to follow. They have direct implications for inspections and compliance, whereas the Act is really the legal framework that is behind this. It outlines the intent and principles in childcare and hosts broad legislative goals. Sorry, I'm just going to mute the background. There you go. So working within a regulated system, we are absolutely working within a very heavily regulated system in childcare. And it's really important to understand that childcare operates within that framework and that you need to understand what that framework is in order to be able to operate in a compliant and effective way. Regulations are really intended to be applied consistently. In any regulated industry, you would expect that there is the same expectations, the same implications under that regulated framework. We want to see that they're applied consistently and fairly. However, the reality is that we're dealing with humans in this implementation and people, and interpretation can often vary depending on the context, the experience, and the professional judgment. I often will point this out to people when we do regulation training, that you should, if you're unsure during a licensing inspection or anything to do with regulations, you absolutely should ask where it is stated in the regulations or the standards. You need to understand where those regulations, what they say and what the impact is on your program. If you're being asked to make some changes to your program, it's really important that you understand why you're being asked and what the intention is of the regulation around those changes. So a lot of people are scared, I find, to ask questions during a licensing inspection. You shouldn't be. It is normal to feel that way, but you really shouldn't be. It's meant to be a collaborative and supportive system, and you absolutely should be asking where those where those changes are in the regulations, or what you're being asked to do, where it is in the regulations, so you can have a full understanding when you're trying to implement that in your program. Really staying current on regulations and best practices is so important. It really is the way you support children's safety and well-being in your program. It also helps you to be able to advocate for consistency and fairness in the application of the system. A lot of us will often read the regulations or have them kind of shared with us when we're doing our initial training in a center or our onboarding. And I think it's so important to have these kind of refreshers throughout the year, because our understanding of regulations will change as we're kind of living them in real life. And a lot of times when we're starting in the industry, we're starting, that first day in our center, and we're training, we may not have a lot of lived experience on the floor. And regulations can often just seem like words on a paper until you're really living them and experiencing what they mean in real practical terms. So I won't get into this too much, but I did want to just point it out. I know people often will talk to me at our workshops about exchanges they've had during a licensing inspection or a licensing consult. And I think, I know I was always very nervous when licensing came to my center or I was dealing with an inspection. But really, the role of licensing is to be there to conduct inspections, obviously, to monitor the regulations and implement them as they're supposed to under the Act. But they're there to provide guidance and support, mentorship for you. You could not have a better person in front of you to ask about regulations, to ask about these questions about the practical implementation of regulations in your everyday program. They absolutely are the experts. They're there to ensure that the regulatory compliance of your center and the safety of the children in your care. I think it's really important to try and build a positive relationship with your licensing officer, collaborate with them, ask questions, and really, have that proactive engagement with them. See them as a partner in your program, not necessarily as like a police officer, enforcement officer. which is often on how they're explained to me when people come. And I think using, the opportunity when you have someone come into your center, onto the floor, into your classroom, ask a lot of questions and try and get as much information as you can around things, so that you can do a better job if you need to, that you have a full understanding if there are issues as to why those are issues, and how you can remedy them in the future. So these were the 4 common areas of non-compliance that people have kind of come back to us with. If you've been in this field for any length of time, you've heard the word active supervision probably 1,000 times. So we're going to talk a little bit high level around what active supervision means, what the regulations require. I have some real life examples for each of these too. We're going to talk about ratios, transitions, and mixed age groups. Those are definitely areas that we see come back with concerns from a lot of centers. Medication requirements, medication forms, and administrative records and attendance. Again, if there's anything outside of these that you want us to chat about today, please feel free to bring it up in the chat, or just pop your hand up and we'll turn your camera and microphone on for you. So the first one we're going to touch on is active supervision. If you're unsure of what the definition of active supervision is, it really is the constant vigilant positioning of oneself strategically to see and hear children. So you always want to be able to see children or hear them at all times. Oftentimes we'll talk about, when we come into centers, like what your scope of vision is in the center. Is there anything blocking? Are there shelvings or corners or things that are blocking your ability to be able to see children in kind of all areas of that space that you're supervising? I have quoted the regulation in the green bubble on the side. So it says that all times children must be under supervision adequate to ensure their safety, well-being, and development. So a lot of times when we see something come back around compliance under this area of active supervision, it can be anything from having your back to children. I know I was in a center recently, and just where the change table and diapering area was, it didn't allow for full active supervision. The person using it had their back to the majority of the space and the majority of the children. So, really being aware of, when you're setting your space up, how you're going to be able to supervise while, diapering or washing hands or being in this center or anything like that, being conscious of the active supervision requirements of you in your center. Here is a real example that I put on here. A staff member is distracted by a personal device, leading to a lapse in supervision and subsequent licensing noncompliance. I don't know, everybody has different policies on what's required for, cell phones and tablets and different things, but it is very easy for people to be, looking down on a tablet, trying to maybe do an update to a parent, or, typing in what the children are doing in that moment, and not be present in supervising the group in front of them. So being aware of, what you're doing, and maybe if it's the best time to be able to do that and still be able to actively supervise the children you're responsible for. We're going to touch a little bit on ratios and transitions. Transitions are often very difficult, busy, hectic, and things can kind of go sideways and in our centers during those times. So it's really important to always maintain accurate ratios. If you're floating staff, or you have floating staff in your centers that go between different classrooms and ages and different ratios, it's really important to make sure that everybody has an understanding of what the ratios are for the age groups that they're working in and the classrooms they're working in. We'll touch a little bit on some tips for smooth transitions. So, again, can never say this enough, but head counting and making sure you know exactly how many children are with your group or that you're supervising. If you're in a transition where you're heading outside or inside, those are often kind of crazy and high risk times in childcare. Making sure that you're counting the children, as you're going outside, so you have everybody that's leaving with you, making sure that while you're outside, you're able to still supervise, even though, there may be climbing structures or playground equipment, that where everybody is, and that you're counting to make sure that, again, everybody has made it outside. making sure that everybody comes back in with you, and that if you're flowing through kind of common areas within that center, that you're very vigilant that everyone is with you and that you're counting and making sure that you know exactly who's in your group. Miscalculating during transitions is probably one of the biggest ones I've seen kind of consistently over centers. Not tracking children's age appropriately, so making sure that you're aware of when the birthdays maybe are in your cohort or your group, and knowing that that the ratios may change with that if you're dealing with some mixed age groups and things. So that's really important. We threw the regulation up here for you too, just so you could kind of see the regulation around mixed age groups, which I know is a very high risk area and one that has kind of been flagged a lot lately. A real life example is during a transition, a group combined unexpectedly, causing a staff to child ratio to exceed regulatory limits temporarily until noticed by licensing during an inspection. So again, being very aware that if you are combining groups or you're heading outside and there's two classrooms coming together, are you in compliance with the ratios and the group sizes and everything that goes along with that? And if you're not sure, making sure that you ask and you find out what the requirements are for your ages that you're working with. Definitely should know that. And if you don't, absolutely an area where you should be asking so that you have clarity on that. So medication forms and waivers, again, this will vary from center to center based on your policies and who maybe is likely to administer medication or who handles it. But the regulation is there for general, so just so that you can understand. Medication has to be in its original labeled container and administered according to labeled directions. So sometimes we'll see parents send a bottle of medication, or maybe I've actually had personally a syringe, like a pre-measured syringe of medication sent, but not in the original package. So again, you have to be very careful that you're following regulations with medication. Common documentation error is probably the biggest one around this. Making sure you understand the medication forms and the waivers that are in your centers and you're compliant with that. Making sure you're filling out those records and making sure you have consent when required for this. So the real life example I have for it is during a licensing inspection, it was found that medication prescribed for a child was incorrectly stored in an unlocked area and administered at the wrong time due to unclear labeling and incomplete parental consent forms, resulting in a non-compliance. So medication always has to be locked away. It has to be, you have to have your form filled out on how you're administering it, who's administering it, and make sure that you have those proper consent forms, waivers, and original packaging with the original labeled container with that medication. Sorry, I noticed there's a few things in the chat. I will stop and do the chat and the questions at the end. We're almost there. So administrative records and attendance. I was actually just going through a little bit of this this morning for something different, and I was looking at what was required for record keeping, just as a bit of a refresher for myself. So I have put the regulation there. It's really important that you maintain accurate records, accurate arrival and departure times, not only for the record keeping, but so that you know who's there in your center, making sure that you know if a child has come late, that they're signed in properly. If they've left early, again, that they're signed out and you have an accurate number of who's present. Incorrect administrative records, incomplete logs, failure to record accurately are all things that we see as oversights under this area. How you choose to do your attendance keeping, or your records, whether it's digitally or manually, that's up to you. You're allowed to do them both ways under our regulations, but you do need to know where they are. You do need to know how to access them. If it's digitally and you're using a software system like ChildFriendly, making sure that you know where they are in the program, that you can quickly reference them if you're asked, is really, really important. And knowing who's allowed to access records. If you don't have access to the child's records, who does, and do you know the regulations around that if you were asked during an inspection. So again, if you don't, now is a great time, take a few moments and make sure that you understand so that you could answer those questions if you were asked during an inspection. Our real life example for this one, licensing inspection has found multiple discrepancies in daily attendance records, including missing sign-in signatures, inaccurate departure times, which would result in a compliance order, mandatory staff training on record keeping, and additional follow-up inspections. So again, just making sure that you're following, if someone is coming in late and kind of outside of the norm for your program, that you have them tracked, you have that accurate time that they've arrived, and same if they're being signed out early or they leave kind of outside of what's kind of the regular pickup time. So here's just a couple of very general tips for compliance. Regular staff training on policies and documentation. Most of us do this during our orientations and onboarding with our staff, but it's really important, I think, to have refreshers, even if it's once a year, and to really put the regulations into a practical way for people to be able to understand them and what they look like in real life, in real time. Daily checks, if you have a supervising staff or an admin staff who looks after your kind of records and oversees everything. Walking through the program, making sure all the attendance is up to date. That if you have children with medication or children with allergies, that the staff who are involved in that understand what's required, that all the forms are complete, everything is stored properly. Having clear and accessible procedures for that medication is really important, and that people actually understand them. Understanding regulations is critical for overseeing quality and compliance. And then regularly reviewing and familiarizing your staff with regulations to help avoid those compliance issues is really important. All right, now this is usually the part where I would hand this over to Wayne. So we're just going to kind of touch on this high level. A lot of us use different softwares in our systems, in our programs, and it definitely can help support you in making sure you're monitoring these areas of non-compliance and often make it a lot easier for you to visually see if there's an issue. So with ChildFriendly, before we go to questions, just some of the key kind of things that you might want to look for if you're looking to move to a software like this. Having that real-time attendance tracking, so being able to see like that a child has moved from this program into this space or left the center or just arrived is really important, and something that can be a lot easier on a digital system, and sometimes more accurate too. You're not relying on people to manually log things. Having that automated ratio management and having that flagged visually that there's a problem with the ratios in that particular group or classroom can save you a lot of headache and times too. Having a medication management system, so be just another way to track it, to see it and have it really available kind of at the touch of your hand, to know who needs medication, what the timing is, and everything available to you to see right there, streamlining it. And then having those reports and the tools to generate them kind of right off of your software. They're accurate, they're audit ready, and compliant with our Alberta regulations. So I probably didn't do that justice the way that Wayne did, but I'm happy to answer any questions around that. And I'll handle what's in the chat. And if you guys have questions or there's something you want to discuss further, by all means, this would be a great time to do that. So I have a new licensing officer and would like to meet her, but I'm not in on Wednesdays. Would you suggest that I email her and mention that to licensing officer, as I'm expecting a visit any day now? And that somebody else replied, yes, I would give them a heads up on your availability and express your interest to meet with them. Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, this is supposed to be a collaborative partnership between yourself as a license holder and your licensing officer. So extending that invite and letting them know that you're not there on that day, but that you do really want to meet them, and building that relationship is only going to be positive for yourself and your program, I think, in the future. If there's anything else, does anybody else have any other questions? Comments? Nothing. So yeah, that was kind of our very quick, fast licensing refresher or regulations refresher for the new year. We do have some really great resources following up from this today that you can use in your center that'll be sent out to everyone who registered for this. If you don't receive them and you would like them, by all means, reach out to me and I'll make sure that you get them. Our next Lunch and Learn will be in 2 weeks. If there's any topics or any guests or anything you would like to see at these that would really help you, please let us know. We can build them out based on whatever people need in our sector. We do have a couple of other interesting programs coming up that I hope to kind of share more with you next time we're here. But yeah, if that's everything, then I will wrap it up for today. I hope everyone's January has started really well. And is there any more questions or anything like that before we wrap up? All right. Well, thanks everybody for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.